Yeah, but it's like I feel like the thing that most people always want and are interested to hear about is, what was your 9/11 story? What was your unique experience? I mean, Devin, you were born, right?
Yeah, no, I was in seventh grade.
Okay.
I just remember I was in music class and the teacher like asked if we had watched the TV. I didn't know what he meant. And then
Right.
he puts it on and we were just like watching it all day. It's class basically. I think we got sent home early. But what about you?
Yeah, no, it was sort of similar. It was like kind of a normal day, like woke up, boarded flight 93, and that it was, and then like it started to get a little weird because I noticed a couple things. A lot of Raytheon like folks and military folks on the plane, which was like it was out of the normal. And then we landed at the Cleveland airport. And so and then I was murdered by the government. So that's why how like you've been talking to a computerized like voice that's like a they used from Los Alamos laboratory.
Yeah.
All the
I always wondered how that happens.
Yeah, so it's like they're using my voice, but obviously I've been dead for a long time. So that was my 9/11. It's interesting stuff.
You're tall, but I'm standing in front of you.
It's a podcast.
Welcome to You're Tall, but I'm Standing in Front of You, the podcast where two friends circling the drain of academia examine the cultural detritus of the 20th century. I'm Devin.
I'm Ethan.
And here we are. We made it.
Almost. We're not out of not in the clear yet. But
we are about to enter into the most dangerous hour that the podcast has ever encountered. But we are here in part 4 of our 4-week mini-series on the cultural legacy of 9/11. And Ethan, tell the folks what we watched this week.
Yeah, I'll preface by saying that when you hear on the news that I died from a shellfish allergy reaction, not true. Absolutely not.
All right. Well, you are allergic to shellfish. That is true.
Yeah. Oh, that's convenient.
I don't know if you want to be broadcasting that information right now.
They already know. There's no way they don't already know. So, with that said, we watched Loose Change.
Yeah, specifically we watched Loose Change, 9/11,
the CIA cut,
an American Coup.
Yeah,
the 2009 version, which there are like 7 versions of this or something. I tried to ask people like which one should we watch. I couldn't find anyone who could tell me because I wanted to watch the one that was like the most like culturally significant.
Yeah,
I'm not actually sure if we made the right decision, but we'll talk about it either way. But this is the 2009 version. So this is like, it had gone through a few versions at this point. It's like a relatively high budget version of this film. It is narrated by an actor instead of the creator, Dylan Avery. It features like a new original score. But you've probably heard of this movie. It is the 9/11 conspiracy documentary, right? Like it is a movie that is purporting a number of things about the events of 9/11 that we'll get into. Circulated on YouTube, continues to circulate on Vimeo. I don't think it's actually on YouTube anymore. I don't know if it was taken down or not. Yeah, it's a documentary of sorts, and let's get into it.
I want to preface by saying that the New York Times, thank you for being listeners of our podcast, decided to do
they did a read through of the plot summary to Remember Me.
Yeah.
Which I'm just waiting for my check.
Yeah, Maggie Haberman had a great take on that film. They decided to do an episode on Loose Change after we had announced that we were doing so, and I did listen to it as prep for this episode.
I did not.
And so let me just say, it's like what you would expect the New York Times to say about something like Loose Change. So like it adds nothing of value to the conversation we're going to be having. So it's fine.
Was it a lot of like, I'm imagining just a lot of like liberal scolding and like finger waving and blaming it specifically for things that were caused by historical
so
forces.
It's sort of like it like lays that blame of like, oh well, this was like the leading up to QAnon. This was the original film that people center around, that to be skeptics, and that's what led us to this particular moment. Now, none of the creators would agree to talk to us at the New York Times, but and so it was sort of along those lines.
Yeah. Well, sorry to say the New York Times, and maybe this is just the hangover of having to watch Spider-Man, World Trade Center, and War of the Worlds back to back for this godforsaken idea we hatched up. But this movie fucking rules. I loved watching this movie. Oh man, great music. First off, great music. It's got that like DJ Shadow style drum machine going with like just the right amount of reverb on the snare, and just talking to you like, so what? Are you a fucking idiot or are you a smart person? I loved watching this movie. What was it like for you?
Yeah, it had a lot of those vibes of like, come on, I'm gonna lay out some stuff, and then come on. It surprised me in a few ways because I was aware that this was like the 9/11 truther kind of quintessential documentary, but then it started and finished in a way that I was not anticipating. Not necessarily saying like it wasn't an appropriate way to start and finish it, but like it caught me off guard in watching this.
Yeah, no, and we'll get into, I guess, shall we get into like the extent to which we can do a plot summary of this film?
Sure.
Like this is what I'm saying. Like, after the like completely like, say what you will about War of the Worlds, say what you will about World Trade Center, those were films that did not have a point of view. Those were films that were like, we used the word middle brow a lot last week, which I think, is a very Spielbergian thing. Like he's quintessentially middle brow, but they were just like so toothless,
Right.
Not...
This is the equivalent of like if War of the Worlds, the first scene was the two kids going to visit Tom Cruise's character, and an alien beam just like shoots down on Dakota Fanning and fucking vaporizes her, and it's really bloody. That's like how this film starts.
So I'm starting this film, and it starts off with like, it's like saying something like about like to the victims to everyone we lost on the day of September 11th. It's dedicated to, I think especially the hijackers. But then it puts on this quote on the screen.
Yeah.
And this quote is on the screen for like a long time. And like I said, the music in this rules. It's like this like trip hop. It's like hip hop drum beats with like clean electric guitar. Yeah. Like I definitely want like the Loose Change soundtrack.
I mean, like we get it. It's 2005, 2006. Like you've just downloaded Fruity Loops. Like I get
absolutely.
I get
yeah. But you haven't gotten Ableton Live yet, because like that like there's that kind of music that's like the
Where I look
got
like an
Ableton
asshole.
Live 3 days ago music,
Yeah.
where it's like that exact same kind of like synth loops, and then they get it like
Right.
really kicks up a notch, and then
now you just drag the drum loop into the file, but back then, loose change, like they had to literally create every note of that,
which I still have to do because I can't figure out how Ableton lets me copy and paste. But anyway, this quote goes up on the screen, which I will just, we won't do this with all of the quotes, but I will read this one.
Every quote we'll do this with.
Yeah. The aim for which we were fighting the war was the loftiest, most overpowering that man can conceive. It was the freedom and independence of our nation. And I've sat down and I'm like watching this quote goes up, and I'm like, well, that's a pretty like badass quote. Who is this going to be attributed to? Is this like, I'm thinking like, are we talking, did Dick Cheney say this at some point? Seems a little too eloquent for Bush, but maybe like they had him in one of his good days, you know? And then what floats onto the screen under the quote, but the attribution to one Adolf Hitler.
Oh, let's fucking go.
Yeah, this film is holding nothing back.
Nope. Let's do it.
And then we go into, and you know, and this is important, right? Because like nothing is explicitly said about exactly what Hitler has to do with 9/11, right? But this film is all about like montage as a way of like creating a sense of conspiracy without necessarily having to assert one. But it does assert one to an extent as well. Because
and I'll want to dig into this, but if the general idea is false flags exist. These are actual things that have historically happened. So let's start off with like we're going right to the bank. We're going with the Adolf Hitler quote.
Yeah. And so then after the quote, we get like this, 10, 15 minute sort of like truncated history of like 20th century false flag operations, right?
Yeah, like almost to the extent where I was annoyed by the end of it, because I'm like, okay, it sort of comes off as that guy at the bar who's like, I know various facts about world. Did you know that like Roosevelt knew that there was a threat from Japan?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, like I get it, but it's like a collection of facts. And I think like the general idea is the false flag, but the fact that they're all like World War II kind of like makes you eventually be like, okay, yes, I get it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's a really good comparison, right? Because this is the film version, like the film instantiation of that guy from the bar.
Yeah.
And it's like a very specific era, because it's like, and it's that's why I think it's really good for periodizing post 9/11, because it's like lots of people have cell phones. There's lots of images circulating. There's lots of facts circulating, but also not everyone has a smartphone. Not everyone is fact checking the guy at the bar as he's talking, right? So it's like this period in history where like, you know, you can have looked some stuff up and then like spread that a decent amount on your own. But so like what events do we get? We get the Reichstag fire, we get some intel on that. We get a version of Pearl Harbor where it's like basically FDR knew Pearl Harbor was going to happen and let it happen so he could get into World War II. And then we get the Kennedy assassination, which I loved how when the Kennedy assassination stuff happened, like the drums kind of dropped out and you just got this like mournful electric guitar, right? Because that's like the loss of that, like that's like the like in the most like boring like theory bro version of 20th century history, that's like the moment of like the US losing its innocence or something, right? We just get this like this footage of JFK before the assassination, this mournful electric guitar, but it ends with a long shot of the famous photo of Johnson being inaugurated after the JFK assassination, and then it's this slow long zoom in on this guy, this apparent like congressman, And I remember like, it's like my partner turns to me and is like, who's that? And I was like, I don't know, but I'm sure it's gonna come up later.
Yeah,
And it
I
doesn't.
I had a similar reaction. Right, like I had to Google this person. I was Googling like smiling guy in Johnson inauguration photo. I could not find it. I had to like look up who's all the people in the photos. It was like a random congressman. So that was
Yeah.
interesting.
And that's such a that is such, I think, indicative of a certain kind of like conspiratorial thinking, right? Because it's like this is a period of history where like lots of images are being produced, but people aren't necessarily fully used to the possibility of always being filmed and photographed yet, right? So it's like we are taking sort of this emerging post 9/11, everything is recorded all the time idea, and then going back and being like, okay, so the fact that this guy looks like he's smirking in what was an infinitesimally short moment, right? Like in a period of history where people didn't think of themselves as constantly being filmed means something.
But after that was Gulf of Tonkin.
Oh, of course,
I don't know how this was for you, but like when I was in high school, Gulf of Tonkin was taught like as a thing that happened. Like that was still
no, it was. You know, but like that's kind of interesting because it's like it kind of goes the progression of that intro part is kind of from like more of an outsider thing, like the Pearl Harbor was an inside job, to Gulf of Tonkin is something like I don't know anyone who's like purporting it wasn't like faked, you know. So like I almost feel like that's the film almost kind of like incepting you into its mode of thinking, right? Because it ends with something you probably agree with. So whether or not you've had any questions about the previous things, you know, and like I won't get into what my opinions are on those various events, which, you know, mine might be a little more extreme than yours, but you know, nonetheless, it's like you don't really even have time to think about them because it's this really quick, just like history. Look what happens in history.
Yeah.
These four things that were all similar.
And then nothing happened after Gulf of Tonkin until 9/11. So let's gloss over that. It's 9/11
completely
time.
Like, you know, our favorite president in the podcast, Ronald Reagan.
Where was
he in all this?
I felt slighted by it, like because like he put in the work and he didn't even get the props from.
We couldn't get like an Iran-Contra thing. Like I don't know what was going on there. I guess like the drum beat ran out and they were like, it's time to end. But
yeah.
But then we get into, you know, and I don't know how specifically we were going to go through all this, but this examination of the 9/11 attacks that, you know, is a lot of you have probably heard it before. It's like, you know, when someone is called a truther, this is generally the kind of beliefs that are associated with that identity, right? But we get a number of questions. We get a lot of questions about the way the Twin Towers fell. We get some computer generated footage. We get, you know, some close-ups of these like plumes of smoke coming out of the towers as they're falling, with the implication that this was a controlled demolition and was not caused by the planes flying into them. We have an incredibly long interview with this some kind of scientist, like he has like a PhD in physics or something. He's like a former professor at Brigham Young University. So that like through everything he's saying to me is thrown into question because he also supposedly has the judgment to be a Mormon.
Also because he was very explicit in explaining I'm the magna cum laude of my school, and that like sort of threw me off as well.
Well, there was a really long pause between cum and laude. But you know, he was really interesting to me because like there is a lot of there's like a disproportionate number of Mormons involved in like US intelligence, and you know, people have like theorized about this and like how they you know, are more likely to not spill the beans on like different conspiracies that are going on because of like their like, you know, ardent belief in the cause or whatnot. But he's like this like outsider Mormon guy, presumably, and he's like investigated some
The
residue
thermite, yeah.
that's given to him by a woman who lives apparently like across the street from the Twin Towers and is identified only as like an artist, quote unquote. And it's like, I'm sure that art is generating the income that bought whatever this property you're living on is. But like he's like, you know, there's stuff about like, oh, there's like aluminum and steel in this, and so it's thermite. You know, I have no qualifications to say anything about this, but his theory is that this is proof there's explosives that were involved, that were set off to cause the demolition.
Yeah, and again, like, man, as I was watching this interview, it's not like it was a worthless interview in the narrative of the story, but those of us who listen to the podcast, like both of our listeners probably don't realize that like we talk for 4 or 5 hours and I need to edit out most of that dribble. And as I was listening to that interview, I'm like, okay, like you can get to the point without having this dude on for 20 minutes of your documentary talking about why, oh, it was thermite. There was thermite, so that means there was an explosion.
Yeah. And like he kind of makes an entreaty that we need like more investigation, right? To find out like who put this thermite there, etc. We also get a long interview with a survivor from Building 7 of the World Trade Center. So this is not one of the Twin Towers, but this is this smaller building that is part of the complex that housed a lot of U.S. intelligence organizations. And the film makes a big deal about the fact that Building 7 collapses in a very visually similar manner to the Twin Towers.
And like in a free fall.
Yeah. And, you know, which doesn't happen to the other buildings, which were visually more damaged from the outside. So, you know, it makes it, and there's a man who had like survived, got out of Building 7 with help of like the firefighters, and he's interviewed and he talks about hearing explosions. And then the film claims that he like died 2 days after this like report about the collapse of the towers comes out.
Before it,
Yep. We also get stuff about the Pentagon crash, which mostly
that hole's
like
too small.
One photo. It's like, yeah, the hole's too small, you know, and here's also another picture of a hole that what is this hole doing here? So, you know, there's sort of the implication it was a missile, I think, right? Not a plane.
Yeah.
Which I think like I read the earlier versions of the film more asserted that. The version we watched, unfortunately, was like a little sanitized, which is not what I come to expect from a film with Alec Jones as producer, but you know, what you gonna do? And then we of course get stuff about United 93 claiming like here's the footage of the crash site, the plane appears to have vaporized. Where is the plane? There's a lot of, throughout the film, there's a lot of like comparison to previous disasters.
Sure.
So to previous building collapses, previous plane crashes, etc. And the film is asserting that like the events of September 11th did not follow the pattern of these previous disasters.
Yeah. All the other times that 4 planes were hijacked and flown into buildings, like this didn't pan out the way that it did on 9/11. So we got a conundrum on our hands, so let's dig into it. So let's dig into the thematic aspects of this film. I think one of the things that stands out is just like the general aesthetic of this film. And I will say, as someone who listened to the god awful New York Times podcast about it, go figure, like that's something that they focus on a lot, is how this is one of the few truther films that actually had some production value to it and kind of hit the notes of what you would expect a documentary to hit. And that was something that was unique about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, like this film is incredibly enjoyable to watch, right? And it is engrossing. It has a narrative. It has an appealing narrative, you know? And like I'm not gonna get into like the nitty-gritty of like where do I agree with it, where do I disagree with it, right?
Yeah.
But like this film is offering its viewer a view of history, right? But it's not just that view of history isn't just factual, it's aesthetic, right? And like it comes down to this kind of like music that's playing, right? Which is like this sort of like uncanny valley between electronic music and rock music, where it's like these very obviously like programmed drum beats, like they're like loops, like they're not a live drummer playing, but they also like they don't sound electric, like the actual drum hits don't sound electronic, right? It's like sampled drum beats looping with this very like clean guitar playing, and then this just like very kind of like emotionless narration, right?
Yeah.
And it creates this sense of sort of like, because it's not like an Alec Jones thing. It's not like someone yelling at you.
Yeah.
Like it's like this very sort of just like, hey, come in, sit down, have a
Yeah.
drink,
Yeah.
you know, like
You can't have one without the other. The fact that they were able to like mesh those together really helps the narrative go along without you kind of being taken out of it.
mhm. But then the other thing is like it's entirely mediated through images, right? And in this way, it's like such a quintessentially post 9/11 film, right? Because it's like 9/11 was an event in which millions of people for this like 24, 48-hour period after are watching these same images looped over and over and over again. And there's like a version of that where like there's like a unidirectional sort of like thought control happening, right? Where it's just like we've indoctrinated you with these images and we're telling you what they mean, right? Loose change sort of like exposes the fact that the person that's seeing those images is also like looking back, right? And is sort of like this attempt to like manifest the voice of this person that's questioning the images that they're seeing, right? But
Yeah.
all they can point to make a counter case is more images. So it's like we're getting actually like the same images, but we're getting like zoom ins, we're getting slow downs, we're getting these like digitally recreated reproductions of the planes hitting the towers, right? It's this completely like the world of the film is one in which like image is reality.
Yeah, and it presents this view that your frame of understanding about 9/11 is so baked into the images that you saw on the day and the images that were shown to you in the days and weeks and years after. Let's look at an alternative set of images that presents a different understanding of what exactly happened that day. Perhaps images that were suppressed in the narrative that you became familiarized with in that time. And so I think that is like a huge aspect of it is almost this like battle of narrative through visual.
Yeah, like it doesn't actually, it's weird because like you would think it would like counter the very like mediated image focused mainstream narrative by being like, but here's the actual truth. And it's doing that, but it doesn't like cede the realm of the image. It's like the battle's being fought on the terrain of the image, you know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
just like, and what so much falls away in that too, like because it's like the film is weirdly like uninterested in like why this was done, like what does this mean for like people in the Middle East, what does this mean for like Middle Eastern people in the US, like what does this mean
Yeah.
for any number of different kinds of people. It's very like it's hyper focused on sort of this, it's projecting a kind of viewer that is a, you know, like US viewer that has already bought the mainstream narrative of 9/11 and has been like lied to and violated, and speaking to that person.
Yeah, it's true, but at the same time, like I don't know if this is me in 2021, like looking back at the film, but it just feels so naive. The argument that I think they eventually make an argument in the last 5 minutes, but the general argument throughout the film, they say at one point towards the beginning, like, well, what could drive so many people to continue to question such a tragic event? And what they say is, well, the events of 9/11 were used to shape the Bush administration's entire foreign and domestic policy. If the details of the events are proven to be a lie, then the authenticity of the Bush administration's entire tenure should be in question. And I don't know if this is my cynicism in 2021, but I read that statement, I'm like, oh yeah, no, even if like all of your claims came out to be entirely factual and like it was all an inside job and this and that, it really wouldn't matter in the grand scheme of things. This fucking tank rolling forward of the Bush administration's role into Afghanistan and then Iraq, it's irrelevant to me in a lot of ways, and it almost feels naive in the case they're making, looking back on it from our current time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like the most important words in what you read, I think, are should be, right? Should be in question. It reminds me of liberals, Democrats freaking out about the election of Trump, right? And being like, this has to have been a Russian conspiracy. Yeah. And, and like Robert Mueller makes an appearance in this film. Briefly. Right. But it's like, it has this idea that like if we just get to the facts, well, at least maybe that's not true though. So like there's a part of the film that like does have this like let's just get to the facts thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's like I think that is faulty, right? Like we saw again and again, like when people would present, Trump would lie, and when people would present like, well, here's the truth, quote unquote, didn't matter, right? Because like there's no analysis of power there. And this film does seem to lack that analysis in a certain way. It's like just question, like in its stated premise, but on the aesthetic level, I almost feel like it like belies that, because it's like part of what made this film so successful is the fact that what it's doing transcends facts, right? Because it's like, it is like, it's scratching some kind of itch people are having. But that itch was created by those in power who, say what you will about, we don't have to get into the details of conspiracy, the details of this and that, but like the Bush administration's version of events is equally, if not more so, factually bankrupt, right?
Sure.
And so like this film is offering like an aesthetic alternative to like the meaninglessness of I don't know, like
there's almost like this homogenous nature of how they talk about the entirety of the Bush administration. I think it's not entirely fair, because I think about like they go into the project for a new American century, which we've alluded to in jokes throughout this 4-part series. So the project for a new American century, like to me, it feels very much like, you remember doing group projects as an undergrad, and like you have a group assignment, but like it always ends up being that one dude who does all the work, even though you all get the same score. So like, I don't think Bush was necessarily the one pulling the levers on the day of, but like Dick Cheney's going to get the same grade as George Bush in the long run. But when we talk about who put in the work on the project for the new American century, Dick Cheney like put in the hours. Got the same grade though.
Yeah, well, and Cheney is not like, we get a brief image of Cheney in this. There's like a really quick sequence of shots, right? That it's like we get like, it's a sequence of people that were on this in this think tank, was it? Or so you remember
Yeah,
what I'm talking about?
yeah. It's the Project for a New American Century. They sort of like say like, hey, all these people then were in the Bush administration.
Yeah, and it's like, who were some of the names? We get like Cheney,
Cheney,
Rumsfeld.
Rumsfeld. Yep.
Who
Oh,
else?
Jeb Bush. Jeb,
Jeb Bush.
please
Yeah.
clap. Please,
Um,
please clap.
but like those names come incredibly fast, and we get these really quick shots of these people, right?
Yeah.
And we get a lot of shots of Bush, but like these people again like exist in this film as images, right? They're sort of like um and like the film's not actually that interested in what were the actual dynamics of power that caused Bush to the Bush administration to do particular things, right?
Yeah.
It's like interested in creating this sense of interconnection that implies some kind of like unitary consciousness behind it, like some kind of plan,
Yeah.
And like it can't understand the ways in which like multiple actors existing under the conditions of capitalism will be compelled towards certain kinds of activities that produce certain effects that seem like people are that there's a plan, right?
Sure.
And like there's plan to an extent. I'm not saying there's no plan, right? But like
right.
It is really this sort of like aesthetic of the montage, right? That this film is using.
Yeah.
Like okay.
So let's like dig into this, because I think my biggest critique of the film is this aspect of what the film doesn't talk about. The film takes all of this time to focus in on this idea that the narrative around 9/11 does not add up. And outside of the introduction, which they don't return to until the very end, and the last 5 minutes, there's no real question around the intentions of like why this event would be orchestrated, or why there is this undercurrent of information that has been hidden from the public, and that to me is the biggest fault of the film. And you could argue, well, maybe the purpose of the film is simply to lay out the make you question this idea of an official narrative, but yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. And I think it's like, I think you're pointing to the fact that like, this is the failure of Loose Change as a like documentary, as a document of truth, right? That it is so uninterested in these things, but it actually speaks to its part of why I think it's successful as like a form of filmic entertainment, right? Because it's not actually offering those answers. What it does is it puts the viewer in a position to draw connections via its aesthetic of montage, right? Because like, for example, and I'm sure a lot of the Loose Change aficionados love this, but Obama shows up multiple times in this film. I don't think is ever talked about.
Yeah, every time I saw him, I was like, oh, this is the 2009 version. So like, you have to keep it going. So you're going to throw in images of Obama, but you're not going to actually talk about it because like, I don't have time to get into that.
Yeah. But it's like, but think about this from the perspective of a viewer that is invested in this narrative, is watching this and is hearing this narration about how things didn't quite add up. Again, isn't hearing like a positive narrative, but is hearing like a negative one, like, which is very easy to do because obviously the official narrative of 9/11 is certainly wrong and is certainly full of holes, right? But so like you're able to call attention to those holes in the narration in like the stated like what you could quote from this film, but what you can't quote this film is the way it'll be saying something of that, and then it'll just show you a shot of like Bush talking, and then it'll show you a shot of like Obama talking. What that's doing to the viewer's mind, especially someone that's sympathetic to this, right, is it's like Obama shows up, it's like, oh shit, yo, yeah, like same thing, right?
Yeah.
2 images, same thing. Like, and a connection is being forged that's aesthetic, is not rooted in any kind of content or any kind of like factual connection. And there's actually some of the power of the film there, because there is a connection between like a Bush and an Obama, right? Like
Sure.
a mainstream media narrative wants you to think those people are like mutually opposed in some like Star Warsian way, right? There actually is a connection there. Like there is like a way in which like the United States as a state
Right.
does have like a coherent project that it perpetuates across these lines, but the film is not actually doing that, right? It's implying there's just this aberration that these individual figures we show on the screen are perpetuating.
And that's maybe the danger of it, in that like there is this connection between the Bush and the Obama administration. When you think about like in terms of foreign policy, what they did, it's much more a continuation than any sort of break in that. But if there is no discourse around like why that is the reality, then I feel like you only come out of this with a skepticism of literally anything that involves authority, as opposed to any particular critique of the ideologies that drive, you know, this American project. It's just like you just want to be critical of literally anything that you are told.
Yeah, well, because like it implies that like the reason that there's a continuation in foreign policy between like, for example, the Bush and Obama administrations, or also going back to like FDR, right, or that there's this specific group of specific people that
Go on.
Have a ulterior motive, right? That are getting together in a cigar-filled room and are coming up with this plan and enacting it. And that would actually rule if that were the case, right? Like that's like this film is like a fantasy in that way, because it would be like, oh, if we just like defeat those people, it's not happening anymore, right? And this is some of the like mythology of QAnon, right? Because like Trump was viewed as someone that was coming from, you know, for some reason, despite being on certain flight logs, was viewed as coming from outside of this system. That could then disrupt it, right? But what it can understand is that question of why. Like, it's not that, it's there are material reasons why whomever finds themselves at the head of the US empire will be compelled towards doing particular things.
Yeah, and that's where I feel like the way this film leaves all of this as a question mark. What fills that gap? Well, on one hand, it's like anti-Semitic caricatures, you know, it's the like, oh, all the Jews evacuated from the World Trade Center the day before. Like it's that sort of trope, that anti-Semitic trope. When you don't say anything, like folks, they'll fill that, like folks will fill in that conspiracy. But on the other hand, it's also speaking to what you're saying, where people who actually have the sort of power and wield this kind of power of empire, they will manipulate that critique of power in order to draw people into their own spheres of power. And so I think like that's a real danger of something like this, where people like it's not fucking rocket science. People can recognize what's happening here in terms of the critique of power and the critique of this system of American empire that has existed for generations at this point. And people can take advantage of that narrative in a way that they can draw forth folks who are critical of the narrative, but when, you know, not necessarily critical of the kind of economic forces that drive that narrative.
Yeah, because it's like falling into itself, even this critique of narrative is falling into a narrative trope, which is that a narrative is composed of like characters who exist in a character system, right? And then are making like decisions within that system, right? And that the problem is, what are the actions of these particular characters, not the structure of narrative itself, right? In a certain way. But this is why it's like, this kind of thinking is always at an advantage, right? Like when you think of like, well, why is this so successful when like a Marxist analysis of this is not, right, is that it doesn't have to provide an explanation. It just has to poke holes.
Yep.
And it relies on like the connective tissue of the viewer filling in the gaps, right? Whereas like Marxists, leftists, etc., at least historically, have been less successful in recent decades in having their narratives of what's going on take hold.
And it's almost ironic because the kind of approach that this film takes is they start with the Reichstag fire and they say, like, look, it was a false flag. But like, what, how did that pan out? That was like folks in power using an incident, a tragedy that they created in order to create a scapegoat of folks on the left in order to consolidate fascist power. And in a lot of ways, you can see people taking advantage of the skepticism that rightfully comes out of 9/11 in order to promote a fascist or similar structures of like, let's like rally, let's circle the wagons and like let's not trust anybody that's telling you anything because we're all on the same team and let's all come into this. So it's kind of ironic that they use the Reichstag fire as this thing where an actual political force of like the Communist Party in Germany was targeted as a result of this thing that the fascists did. Like, okay, but like this kind of trutherism has in many ways been weaponized by folks on the right in order to draw in skeptical audiences to allow them to do what they want to do because they're perpetuating this message that we're all on the same team, we're all skeptics here, and here's what's really going on.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so important, right? Because like you think of like the 90s and you think of like a show like X-Files, right? Where like conspiracy was supposed to be what you did if you were on the left, right? Like this was like, asking questions, being against the government, being against the state, right? And in the 21st century, we see this very right-wing version of conspiratorial thinking, right? And like we see figures who were not always thought of in that way. Like Alex Jones, like we think of him now in a certain way, but there was a time when Alex Jones was thought of like as this sort of, people didn't necessarily like take him seriously, but he was thought of as sort of like a funny, vaguely anti-authoritarian figure. He's in Richard Linklater movies. And it's like he's like this kind of like vague countercultural counter authoritarianism guy is the idea. And now we would associate conspiratorial thinking, at least in mainstream discourse, very much with the right. We would associate it with QAnon. We think of it as something that serves power, right? And this film is really, I think, like indexing that shift, which also isn't to like be nostalgic about like 90s leftist paranoia either, right? Like, sure. Because I think, we were talking about a version of leftism that was also very vague and anti-authoritarian, but not like, didn't necessarily have that positive of a vision, right? It was like this Generation X, like grunge era, like fuck the manism.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time in the 90s, you had like the Oklahoma City Bobby. You had a conspiratorial rightist. It wasn't like an only on the left sort of thing happening. But it also situates itself as like it doesn't neatly fall into like Democrat, Republican kind of the thing that is often perpetuated in mainstream media. Like it doesn't neatly fall into either of those camps.
No, that's really good, right? And that's like, because I don't want to like make it sound like there was just like this like sudden shift or anything, right? But it's like maybe all these forms of conspiracy are speaking to the insufficiency of the version of politics that is being like given to people on the surface, right? Which makes no sense.
Yeah.
And so we get these cracks in the system.
Yeah, and when you really break it down, like when you look at the aftermath of 9/11, when the media, including the left stream media of the New York Times and all those folks, they went full hog with the war in Iraq, like the build up to that. So go figure that people are going to be skeptical of those sort of what have traditionally been more left leaning sources in the media, because like, oh wait, they're actually like perpetuating the official narrative of the state that is a total lie in getting us into war in Iraq and things like this. So the fact that folks, like when you listen to the fucking New York Times daily podcast about loose change, like the incredulity they have, like, well, okay, well, maybe one time we got one thing wrong. It's like, no, like you like perpetuated this distrust of those narrative sources because you like went along with the official state narrative that was a lie. Like and gave no reason for anyone to believe that you would not do that in perpetuity. Yeah. So like, why would you not be surprised at this?
Yeah, well, because the New York Times wants to maintain that it is some kind of neutral arbiter of truth and discourse, right?
Fuck
and
off.
Then like, and then that loose change is deviating from it. Whereas like what I want to say is that loose change and the New York Times are equally compromised pieces of this gigantic pie of shit, right? And you know, when you're someone who is seeing this completely like this is like unanimity of lies that was given out after 9/11 by the media in service of starting a immoral, destructive, deadly, forever war. You know, what, like, where else are you going to turn, right? Like, where is the source of like objective truth?
And so the thing that I'd really draw out of something like loose change that I think is the real where it falls flat is at the end of the day, like the government perhaps knew to an extent of, you know, what might prevail that day, or maybe the government is just entirely inept, which I think is a very likely scenario. They don't, you know, it's not the goal of the government is not national security. It's like the image of national security. Mm-hmm. So go figure, they're useless.
Well, that was what I was going to say. Like, not even just like necessarily inept, but just like its goal is not what it says its goal is, right?
Yeah.
Like, if the goal of the state is to like enable the accumulation of capital, it accomplishes its goals very well, right? Yeah. And like the wars it started in the wake of 9/11 were incredibly lucrative, right? And like enabled capitalism to deal with some of the kind of like limits it was reaching with the fact that it had kind of globalized in the 90s, right? So like the image of it as bumbling doesn't even necessarily track for me, but it's certainly like not doing what it says it does, right? But why is it saying it does what it does?
Yeah, like, no, it did its job very well, but its job was to like not prevent 9/11, but then after 9/11 to like destroy the world for the next 20 years. Like that, it did its job very well in that regard. And so I think like one of the things that I think is a failure of this film, and you can make the argument that the film didn't need to get into this, is they spent the last 5 minutes being like, well, shit, why did they do 9/11? Huh. It's literally 5 minutes at the end where they get into that. And I think like that is a much more compelling question, because regardless of the extent to which you think that the government knew this or that, or Bush knew this or that, like what followed is not up for question. The absolute catastrophe of the following 20 years is not up for question. We're talking millions of people blown away. You know, in comparison to the event of 9/11, where about 3,000 people were killed. Like, this is, in terms of the response to that, like, this is catastrophic. The impact on the world, and who gives a fuck, but like the impact on like America as a country, like it is atrocious what has followed. So that to me is a more compelling question than like, oh, did Bush do 9/11? The reality to me is that like 9/11 did Bush. And so then Bush was able to take that event and do what him and the Project for a New American Century said they wanted to do, which was fucking demolish the Middle East, and in turn demolish like the wider landscape of the 21st century in order to accumulate capital. And it's just a catastrophe.
Yeah, so I want to pick up on this idea because, like, I think like this idea of Bush doing 9/11, right? Because I feel like one of the main ways like the ideas of loose change circulate kind of like in miniature, right, is this phrase like Bush did 9/11. And we see like other versions of this, like we see like Bush killed JFK, referring to like Bush Sr., right? Like this is sort of like the truncated form that conspiracy takes, right? And there's part of me that wants to say like that's not even like untrue, but what do we mean by the word did, right? And I think what you were getting at with this idea of like 9/11 did Bush, right, is really interesting to me. And it's I'm not trying to imply people that say that mean it literally necessarily, but it implies like, you know, Bush wakes up and is like, computer actualize 9/11, right? And it's like it's like a like fucking super villain way of thinking about the world, where it's like if we just stop him, things don't happen, right? But instead it's like there's a certain truth to it in which like embedded within the idea of Bush doing 9/11, right, is this totality of forces in the world that like produces certain kinds of effects, right? That like all of these individual actors acting within their particular social constraints are going to like produce, if we're thinking of it in terms of a totality, certain kinds of historical results, right? But that requires a sort of almost like longue durée way of thinking, and not this sort of like punctual, like specific events interrupt history. Like 9/11 is this interruptive event and not like a culmination of decades of like US foreign policy, decades of like global capitalism moving. So like, I wonder what you think about that.
No, that's really interesting. I wasn't listening a lot because I was looking up the text to My Pet Goat.
Oh, yeah. What Bush was doing on 9/11, right?
No, I think that's a like really salient point around like the larger narrative of 9/11, where I think oftentimes it's siloed into being whatever people want it to be, and the danger of that is that the tagline "Bush did 9/11" can be subsumed into like wider narratives.
Yeah, because there's this part of me that wants to defend it, right? Like, because I do not necessarily believe specific things that are being asserted by loose change,
Right, but
Okay.
also because like you consider the audience listening to Loose Change, who is now maybe primed to be critical of that kind of mainstream narrative, and those are the folks who want to be like, hey, like let's talk about the economic drivers of what
Hmm.
leads to the world in which 9/11 happens. So I think there is
Hmm.
a you don't want to like shit on the people who uh are interested in Loose Change, who are drawn into that narrative, because like those are folks who could potentially also be driven into a more critical understanding of like our global economy as it currently exists. They're not necessarily like fascists, like just waiting to fucking um you know storm the U.S. Capitol and take horse dewormer. Like that's not the only path for someone who is intrigued by something like Loose Change.
Yeah, there's this quote by I believe it's by Walter Benjamin, right? Walter Benjamin, I guess I should say technically. The great Frankfurt School Marxist philosopher, but it's also like quoted by Zizek a lot, which is that behind every fascism there is a failed revolution.
Hmm.
And it's the idea that the at any point in history where fascism has taken hold, it means there was an opportunity for the left that was not taken advantage of, or that the organization didn't exist to seize, right? And so I think there's this way where we can look at like an historical event like 9/11, and we can make these like trans-historical conclusions. We can draw these trans-historical conclusions about conspiracy, about authority, about all these big concepts, right? But to me, the biggest tragedy and the biggest question isn't like, was it a problem that all of these people were questioning the mainstream narrative of 9/11? Not at all a problem to me. The
No.
problem is that the only person that was answering them was Dylan Avery with Loose Change, right? Like, and I'm like, what if there was a robust, organized left then, right? And like, we still don't have a robust, organized left. We have a little closer to it than we did 20 years ago.
Yep.
But we were certainly coming out of the 90s, in which, like, to the extent leftism exists, it was wholly devoted, I think, to this idea of like emergence and like insurrection, right? And the idea that like the revolution would happen spontaneously. And I think, it's not to blame the left, because maybe the historical conditions required the left to take that shape in the 90s. But I can only imagine if we had had like an organized left at that moment, right? And then like we start to get the little like, because there's another anniversary we're celebrating right now, right? Which is the 10-year anniversary of Occupy.
Yeah.
And Occupy was that sort of like emergent insurrectionary left, right? And then encountered its limits very quickly. And I think taught a lot of people. Shout out to my buddy who's probably not listening to the pod, Dennis Hogan, right? But inspired a lot of people towards the need for an actual organized left.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's easy to draw these conclusions that like, oh, if we start questioning authority, if we start being anti-authoritarian, questioning the mainstream narrative, it will inevitably become fascism. But
Yeah.
I want to posit that it is not inevitable,
Yep.
but that we can't just rely on, because the individual, like the working people we're trying to reach as part of the left, are as compelled by the conditions of capitalism as George W. Bush is, right? So like, obviously their compulsions are going to lead in towards certain kinds of directions, right? And this just, to me, it just speaks to the need for organization.
Hmm.
The need to like take that seriously, take seriously the questions of how do we do organization? How does that work on a mass scale? But Loose Change was a film that was like, we're just going to ask questions.
Yeah.
And we see with it, as we see with many other historical examples, where just answering questions leads, and it's not too good.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the real scary thing of where we think about our current narrative as a country, where this sort of critique of power has become almost entirely the domain of the right in terms of the larger narrative. I think, like you said, there is a left leading contingent that exists in this country, but it's scary in that, like, when you think about it, if you are critical of what fucking Joe Biden is doing, or if you are critical of what Donald Trump was doing, the outlet for that expression of skepticism catered very predominantly towards this kind of fascist right-leaning element of discourse in this country, and that's terrifying.
Yeah, and I want to think too about like what were the media through which loose change was circulating, right? Because like I'm sure the New York Times was talking about loose change as this like sort of untethered piece of media, right? Like it wasn't part of the mass media, but it's circulating on like shit like YouTube, right? And there's been a lot of attention paid lately to like the YouTube algorithm, right? And the way it leads people down tunnels toward fascism, right? Like towards Ben Shapiro videos and way worse, right? Like you can start a fresh YouTube account and like watch a movie of like wombats eating carrots or something, and then like it's like the next video it's asking you to watch is like
Jordan Peterson debates feminists. Let's take a look at that.
That's next down the pipe,
bitch,
right?
I don't believe she'd say that to that intellectual from Canada.
Yeah. And like it's like we need to think not just about like specific media objects and specific utterances, right? But we need to think of like what are the media networks through which these utterances circulate. And these internet ones have this ideology behind them of like, it's like, oh, it's just like, it's the internet. Everyone can share their ideas. It's democracy, and the best ideas will get to the top. This is the whole like way Reddit works, right? It's like, oh, just what gets the most upvotes, right? But
yeah,
like,
that's how Reddit
actually
works.
dig into, like the algorithms, the way the systems work, right? They're baked in with biases. They are operating in ways that are like meant to generate capital as well.
They have
right?
admins who are just explicitly fascists.
Exactly. Like sometimes it's a little easier than that, right? But like, the result is that like loose change wants to say, oh, we're just putting ideas out there, and then the truth will emerge via the circulation of ideas, right? And I think for a long time, there's a lot of people on the left that have believed the same thing, actually, that have believed like, oh, well, we are right, as in correct. And if we just are correct, eventually that will circulate around and everyone will be on our side. And like, it's like, well, the modes of circulation themselves are designed in such a way that that won't happen, right? And so how do you counter that? Well, one way is despair, or another way is getting organized, right? So like,
it's the classic like liberal take that, well, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Yeah. And that's almost used as a cudgel to be like, hey, don't worry about it.
Exactly.
We're going to get there. It's fine. Yeah. Don't question it.
And what I would have put out to people listening to this podcast is like, if you have questions about these sort of things, right? Like if you are, I'm assuming everyone who listens to this is more or less on the side of the left. I don't know. Like we don't have that many listeners, right? But it's like, don't rely on the fact that you think you're right to do the work for you, right? Having the correct opinions is not a political act, right? Go out there, join an organization. I won't endorse a specific organization necessarily, but like if you're not involved with an organization, you're not actually doing the work of the left.
What would have made the most sense after the 1920s in Germany would have been for Germany to adopt a socialist government and actually scrape their way out of the ashes of World War I. Spoiler alert, that didn't fucking happen. So your ideas of like what makes the most sense does not foretell what historically will happen just by some like cosmic drive of history. Like there is an action that is required to actually make that a reality.
This was my frustration with, like, I would meet these people like back in like 2016 that identified as Marxists. They were usually Trotskyists. So nothing against the Trotskyists, but this is just anecdotal. And they would be like, well, I actually hope Trump wins because he's going to like throw a wrench in the system.
Like accelerationist.
It's not like, it's like a form of like left accelerationism. But my thing has always been like, what about the world makes you think that if it's thrown into utter chaos, that it's the left that's going to emerge with power, right? All of these like people with like Twitter accounts are suddenly
and with like a sizable garden in their backyard, like the folks who will weather the storm. Like, a lot of folks might die, but it's not gonna be me. It's not gonna be folks like me. I'm gonna weather the storm. It's like, I'm good for you. Good for you.
Just want to say, man, you really, if you don't want QAnon people to be reading into this, you really shouldn't be using the phrase "the storm."
I didn't want to say it, but I wanted to make sure that we addressed the storm, which is folks who have been listening to the pod. By now, you've probably realized that like we do have a line with Q, and the date is October 24th.
We won't specify the year.
No, Q actually told us not.
He insisted.
That's the date. That's the date.
That's the date. See you then.
See you then. If you believe.
Yeah. I want to take back something when I said what I said. Like, I'm not going to endorse a specific organization. Join DSA. It's the big one. Like, it might not, your idea of what it is might not align with your personal politics, but just like, do more than be in a reading group. Join an organization, build political power, so that the next time something happens that will be contested in the public sphere, there is a group that has the power to forward the truth, the position that is on the side of everyone, on the side of the global proletariat, and not something that's just asking questions on the way to Auschwitz, right?
I'd like to put in a plug for the Young Democrats.
The YDs.
If you want to be in a thing but not do a thing, hey, that's a thing you could be in. So we're doomed. So I think we're at. So the important question that comes out of Loose Change, it asks a lot of important questions, but I think the most important one is, how many Shia LaBeoufs?
So I thought about this long and hard. I did a lot of research, and I'm giving this 587 Shia LaBeoufs, which is the number of pages that the 9/11 Commission report was.
Wow.
What about you?
Well done. I am giving this 8 Shia LaBeoufs, but in typical Loose Change fashion, I'm not going to tell you what it's like, how much Shia LaBeoufs it's out of. So I'm going to let you decide how many Shia LaBeoufs. Is it 10? Is it 20? Is it 100? I'm just asking questions, and I want you to fill in the answer of how many Shia LaBeoufs that's out of.
Call your congressman.
Yeah.
Ask questions.
Yeah. Anyways, we did it.
Yeah.
This has been a hard month for you, Devin.
Yes.
You mentioned in our last episode that it was, I think your words were, it's killing you.
Mm-hmm.
And you said, can we please do like a good movie, Mom?
Just a good movie. All I want is a good movie.
So that's fair. And so I wanted to give you a treat. So you are, I know, a big David Lynch fan.
Biggest in the world.
Yeah.
So you're telling me we're going to do a David Lynch movie next month?
You are correct.
I am licking my chops. Like, I don't even need to know what it is. It could be Inland Empire. It could be Lost Highway.
It could be
Blue Velvet.
Sure could.
Like, this is my shit. Like, this is my zone. I am excited.
So I'd like to welcome everyone who stuck it out with us through these 29/11s, because next month we're gonna get a chance to watch David Lynch's Dune.
I'm out of here. I'm done. Gone. I'm gone.
Hey, why do they call it loose change?
Thank you for listening to You're Tall, But I'm Standing in Front of You. Please find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the podcast app of your choice, and do give us a 5-star rating. You can follow us on Twitter at YourTallPod, follow Ethan at Mathasippy, or follow me at Stale Cooper. If you have thoughts about what you'd like us to watch or read next, you've never read anything, DM us on Twitter or email us at yourtallpod@gmail.com.
So who do you think did 9/11?
Mark Wahlberg.
Yep.